Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you might be joining us from around the world. My name is Elisabetta Gotor, and I'm Principal Scientist at the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. And I'm delighted to welcome you to today's virtual event, making the launch of a new book, co-edited by Wiebe and myself, on what do we know about the future of food system. This book reflects the result of a long-standing collaboration among scientists from across the CGIAR and partners around the world. Today's event will begin with a brief overview of the book and highlight some key findings from select chapters. That will be followed by a panel discussion, futurist perspectives from countries' partners, regional organizations, and donor agencies, those who will be shaping and are shaped by the future of food system. Now, to get us started, it is my pleasure to introduce Sandra Milach, CGIAR Chief Scientist, who will provide opening remarks. Opening to you, Sandra. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Elisabetta, and thank you all for coming today and for watching us here. Really a pleasure to be here today and to talk about a very inspiring question that inspired this book, which is what do we know about the future of food systems? And why do we need to know that? Because in a world of uncertainty and complexity, I think it's important that we really look at what are alternative possible futures to inform decision-making today. Because, you know, the future, when we get there, is too late. We need to act today so that we have a better future. So, and this is what is called foresight analysis, and it's not a crystal ball, but provides predictions or forecasts. It explores alternative future pathways, so including identification, possible interactions, synergies, and trade-offs between different policy, investment strategies and goals. So many critical decisions affecting food systems, we know, they really are made at the national, local levels. There's no doubt about that. But they are really influenced by what happens at the global levels and at the regional levels. That's where some of these insights for foresight analysis become so powerful for us to actually be able to be actionable at the national and regional levels. And just to give some, highlights on some of potential insights that you're going to read from this book. It's by 2030, for instance, around 80% of the global population will live in sub-Saharan Africa. In the poor people will live in sub-Saharan Africa. So investments in food systems that reduce food prices or create jobs in those places and help the food system will be highly effective in reducing poverty, as one example. But we have more insights into it. Diets, for instance, continue to evolve in all regions, and nutrition challenges are changing as diet shifts towards higher consumption of animal source foods, refined grains, processed and ultra-processed foods. So one of the insights that you're going to read is between 2020 and 2050, there'll be global demands for cereals, roots, and tubers is projected to increase by 30 to 40%. While demand for animal source foods, fruits and vegetables, oils and sugars is projected to increase by 40 to 50%. So yes, we need to produce a lot more of those foods to be able to cope with the future. Now, another example that has to do with environment, I think we also, it's not about producing food and better diets, but it's like how we do it in the planetary boundaries. And, one is the frequency of impact of the extreme climate events. The foresight says they will increase. And for example, in many parts of Southern Africa, low maize yield events, usually they are associated with low rainfall and high temperatures to have a low yield. And they usually occur today every 20 years. So the foresight analysis is saying that they might actually happen every 10 years in the future. in a like a of much faster than occurs with a much higher frequency than today. And in some places, actually, might be every 5 years by mid-century. So those trends really open our eyes to say, which actions we need to do. Another important insight: imports of foods as a percentage of total consumption, have increased steadily over the 20 years. We know that. But the projection says that it will continue increasing by 2050. So this is something that we really need to look into it. So all these insights and many more, they are very important inputs for the types of conversations and dialogues we need to do, the strategic planning we need to do, how we will actually prioritize our actions by national governments, by development partners at multiple levels, and also by us, CGIAR, as we make decisions on how we actually prepare ourselves and do the science for the future. So please let us know if you have any comments or questions, and we look forward to having you in the next week's event. And we also look forward to hear from you. Hope you enjoyed the book. Over to you, Elisabetta. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for setting us up. Let me now call on Kothe Wiebe, Senior Research Fellow with IFPRI and co-editor of the book. From 2022 to 2024, Kothe and I serve as co-leads of the CGIAR Research Initiative on Foresight, under which this compendium was devised and started. It was a long journey. I personally really enjoyed and learned from Kothe a lot. So a heartfelt thank you, Kothe, for this. But I want to give the floor to you because you can provide us an overview of the book and its content. Over to you, Kothe.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta, and thanks also to Sandra for setting the stage very nicely on the challenges facing food systems and also some of the opportunities we have to address those challenges. As noted, this book emerged from a long-standing collaboration among scientists across the CGIAR, as well as our research partners around the world, begun under the Foresight Initiative and now continuing under the CGIAR Science Program on Policy Innovations. Now, the subject of our book is a very ambitious one. We chose to frame the title as a question, so let me begin my overview with two more specific questions. What are food systems? Well, we know they're not just production and consumption, but we also have to keep in mind the increasing importance, in fact, of all of the intermediate steps, the processing, storage, distribution, transportation, everything that's involved in transforming and distributing food from producers to consumers. Food systems also include the natural resources, labor, technology that's necessary for all of these processes, and fundamentally to remember the foundation of policies, investments, infrastructure, innovations, and so forth that underlie food systems as a whole. As such, food systems are very complex. They're made up of many interlinked parts. They're subject to uncertainty, and they're very difficult to steer. So we need to plan today for the food systems that we'd like to see in the future. Next slide, please. So what can we say about the future? As Sandra noted, we don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately, so we can't make precise predictions about what the future will be. But we can say quite a lot about what different pathways could look like, what are the factors that drive those pathways, and what are the impacts of those pathways on the outcomes that we care about. And we can use that information to inform the decisions made today about policies, investments, consumption, and so forth. Now, foresight as such is not new. Farmers have been using foresight for 10,000 years since the dawn of agriculture. Farmers like the family of 3-year-old Rosita on the cover of our book. They need to decide what to plant, when to plant it, without knowing what weather conditions are going to be during the growing season or what market conditions are going to be when it's time to harvest. But they do so based on their own experience, based on expectations about the future, and they're not alone. Private corporations use foresight. Armies have used foresight for centuries, and we need to use foresight for food systems as well. But our challenge in some ways is more difficult because food systems are so complex with many dimensions, many goals, many decision makers. Farm households, for example, are relatively small decision-making units. Corporations and armies are much bigger, but they tend to have hierarchical structures and fairly narrowly defined objectives. With food systems, it's a much more complex picture, with many decision makers, including more than 500 million farming households around the world, many millions more in other parts of the value cycle, and of course, all 8 billion of us as consumers who are making food systems decisions several times every single day. So it's a very challenging proposition, but there are also opportunities, and that comes because the future of food systems has not yet been determined. It sounds simple to say that, but in fact, for better or for worse, the future of food systems will be determined and shaped by the decisions we make today. Next slide, please. So foresight is about looking at the future, but it also needs to be well grounded in an understanding of the past. This is the longest data series I'm aware of on a food price, on a food system indicator, and has to do with wheat prices in England, looking back almost 8 centuries, starting in the year 1264. And it shows a fascinating story. In it, you can see the impacts of weather fluctuations, changes in population, but also changes in policies, in technology, in trade, even the impacts of conflict. And these are many of the factors that we're concerned with today as we think about the future of food systems. But even with the best available historical data, we still can't know for sure what wheat prices or any other food system indicator are going to be precisely a year from now, a decade from now, a generation into the future. And that's where the role of foresight comes in, is to explore different pathways, understand where they come from, where they lead to, and how we can choose the ones that are best for us. Next slide, please. That's part of the goal of this book, with 37 chapters looking at different drivers and impacts of food system change, different regional perspectives from countries representing 40% of the world's population and 50% of the world's ag GDP. Also chapters on different food commodities and on the tools we use to measure food systems and to explore how they might change in the future. So each chapter briefly summarizes the current state of knowledge about the future of these different topics. It contains links to find more in-depth information if you're interested. And importantly, it also identifies gaps where we need to know more in order to make well-informed decisions today. Next slide, please. So you'll hear more on some of the select chapters in just a few moments, but first I thought I would highlight just a few key insights, including some of those that have already been noted by Sandra. One has to do with the future of food demand. It will continue rising, no surprise, in the next several decades, but at a slower rate than it has done in the past half century. In the left-hand panel here, you see global figures. Global population, the red line, is projected to increase by about 20% between 2020 and 2050. Demand for staple foods like cereals and roots and tubers is projected to grow between 30 and 40%. And as Sandra already mentioned, demand for animal products, for fruits and vegetables, and for oil sugars is projected to increase by about 40 to 50% at a global level. We see a similar pattern in low and middle income countries, although at higher growth rates. But in high-income countries, demand is already closer to saturation levels, growth slowing in some cases and even starting to decline in other cases, with one notable exception, and that is a continued growth in demand for oils and sugars, reflected here in the orange line. It continues to go up in high-income countries as it does in other parts of the world. And that raises concerns about nutritional outcomes, particularly overweight, obesity, continued persistence of hunger, as well as micronutrient deficiency, the triple burden of malnutrition that affects populations in many parts of the world. Next slide, please. So demand growth will be a major driver also of growth in food production, along with improvements in productivity, changes in technology, and so forth. But these will be curbed by changes in temperature, changes in precipitation patterns that occur over the long term and globally, as well as increasing frequency of extreme events. And as already mentioned, in Southern Africa, we can see that events with high temperatures, low rainfall, and therefore risks to maize yields, a very important staple crop in the region. Such events which may occur once in 10 years or 20 years at present are projected to occur more frequently, once in 10 years, even once in 5 years in some locations in the future. So analysis like this can help us plan and target better how to anticipate and prepare for and respond to situations like this. Next slide, please. With changes in demand and changes in production, we expect also changes in how food trade flows around the world, between regions, between countries, for different commodities. Some regions like Latin America are projected to continue growth as major exporters of food commodities around the world. Other regions, and particularly low-income countries, in this case in East and Southern Africa, we can see a rising dependence on imports of food as a major source of their domestic consumption. Now, it's important to keep in mind these are not predetermined outcomes. These are not predictions. These are projections based on assumptions we make about future pathways. In this case, these results assume middle-of-the-road changes in population, in income, in technology, and so forth. We may well see different pathways in the future that have faster productivity growth, for example, or different trajectories for demand. And it's important to explore those different pathways in order to inform decision-making. And that's really the role of foresight. So next slide, please. One final insight, and that has to do with the process of foresight. It's critical to include both rigorous analysis and engagement with the people who are affected and the people who are making decisions in different areas. Both are necessary, neither one is sufficient. They're both part of a larger process to inform decision-making. And it's important that that process is not an occasional, one-off, linear, externally driven process, but rather an iterative, systematic process that involves the people who are at stake. And finally, to keep in mind that foresight is not, the role of it is not to determine policy and investment priorities, but rather to inform decisions about those priorities by those at local level, national level, regional level, and even global level. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick snapshot of some of the contents of the book. We'll hear more in a moment. I can't thank all of our contributors by name, but I certainly do want to acknowledge the contributions of the over 100 experts who have contributed to the different chapters in this book, to the editorial and production team at IFPRI for transforming our manuscripts into this book, and of course, to the funders who have supported this research through their contributions to the CGIAR Trust Fund, to the Foresight Initiative, and to the Science Program on Policy Innovations. Thanks very much, and Elisabetta, back to you.
Thank you, Keith, for this overview of the book. Let's now give the floor to a number of co-authors of the book that will present selected chapters. It's my pleasure to introduce you today Pauw, Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI. Then we will have Daniel Mason-Crooks, that is a Senior Research Associate at the Department of Global Development, Cornell University. We will then have Dolapo Enahoro, Senior Agricultural Economist at the International Livestock Research Institute. And finally, Chin-Yin Chan, Scientist at WorldFish. Please all put on your camera, and over to you for a zoom in into this very interesting book. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. So my co-authors and I contributed one of the chapters in the drivers and impact section of the book on poverty and the future of poverty in relation to food systems. And I'm going to highlight three key findings or points that we make in the paper, and there's a lot more in the paper itself. And so I do invite you to read that as well and let us know if you have any comments. So next slide, please. We started off looking at just the recent trends in poverty, and we find that global poverty has declined very rapidly over the last 25 years. So the absolute number of poor people fell by about 1 billion over this period, and at the same time the global population grew by 2 billion. So this translated into very large or rapid declines in poverty rates across all regions of the world. And the outlook suggests that this will continue towards 2030. South Asia, for instance, is expected to effectively eradicate poverty by 2030, but it's not true for all regions. So sub-Saharan Africa, you'll see the red line in the figure on the right-hand side, that rate of poverty decline started to slow down in about 2012, and that rate or that poverty reduction is expected to stagnate going forward. And so as Sandra also said, by 2030, we expect 80% of the world's poor to live in sub-Saharan Africa. And so clearly that is a key region, focus region as far as global poverty reduction efforts are concerned. Next slide, please. So the role of agriculture in poverty is changing. Traditionally, and especially in low-income countries, we've always viewed primary agriculture as very important in reducing poverty. So productivity growth in primary agriculture is typically more effective than productivity growth in industry or services at reducing poverty. And that's understandable. I mean, even today, about 4/5 of the extremely poor people live in rural areas, and most of them are engaged in some form or other in agriculture. And agriculture also has strong linkages to non-farm households through provision of cheap foods. But as our economies modernize and agriculture transforms, that also stimulates income growth and rural-urban migration and changes in employment patterns in our economies, and also changes in food consumption preferences. And so we see over time that there's a growing disconnect between poor people and primary agriculture. And gradually, there's an increase also in the share of processing, packaging, trade, and transport components in the overall cost of food. And so eventually, what our foresight analysis tells us is that growth in the off-farm sector might become more effective or more important in reducing poverty or improving access and availability of healthy foods to poor people. Next slide, please. And so foresight analysis can really help inform some of these complex food policy choices that people working in the food policy or food system space need to make. And the first one there, how should governments prioritize food system investments? So this really relates back to the slide I just had up before. Foresight analysis can help us anticipate some of these structural changes in our economies and help policymakers, better allocate their investments on the farm and off the farm in the food system in order to maximize impacts on poverty. But obviously, policymakers aren't only concerned about poverty. There are many other impact areas as well, or outcomes that they may be interested in. And so again, foresight analysis can help us understand some of the trade-offs or synergies across these different outcome areas. One example that we discuss in the book, and there are others as well, is how food system investments that might be very effective at reducing poverty, such as investments in staple crops, might come at the expense of other outcomes such as better diets or environmental outcomes. And these trade-offs are important for policymakers to understand. And then lastly, there's a time dimension to this as well. Most of the policymakers we work with have a very kind of a short-term planning horizon, but there is a future cost to any action or inaction right now. So 2 examples there. If we delay investments in sustainable production practices, that could accelerate environmental degradation. And a lot of the foresight analysis shows that this burden of that will fall disproportionately onto future generations of poor people. Likewise, if we make quality diets available to poor people now, or accessible, rather than only focusing on the cost of cheap calories, that could result in a more productive workforce in the future, result in higher lifetime earnings, and reduce the cost of or reduce the likelihood of people falling into poverty. And so again, foresight analysis can help policy or highlight the fact that the actions of policymakers now have implications long into the future as well. So I'm going to end there and hand over to Daniel. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to get to talk a bit about innovation, which is a critical driver for food systems change. It's an iterative process that has been a key driver of many of the changes of the food systems that we see historically and we expect into the future. We can go to the next slide here. I think it's one of these processes that we need to think about innovation as a process that happens over extended periods of time and at various scales. As we shape our tools, then our tools shape us. Things that we never imagined, they become desires. Desires then can become necessities. And things that we think we needed can then at some point become irrelevant. So this slide here, I'm looking at sort of the evolution of watermelons, one of the oldest domesticated fruit. And over millennia, the way that we've transformed watermelons from what was a relatively small melon that was really grown more for storage and transport of water in semi-arid and desertic landscapes to one today that's grown all over the world and can be sort of achieved, accessed at any point in time, even in the dead of winter in upstate New York, where very far removed from its origins, thanks to globalization, greenhouses, cold chains, industrialization, where we no longer want necessarily seeds in our fruits. We prefer just to have them without it. And as we can see, what we want from our food system changes, even as the ways that we can change the food system can improve over time. Next slide. And so innovation is this sort of iterative socio-technical process. It embeds combinations of novel ideas with old ideas, with socioeconomic and political institutions that help to shape the types of outcomes that we desire and are willing to accept. It's been central to industrialization and economic growth. It's been key to driving agricultural production and productivity historically. Without food systems innovations of the past, things like the Haber-Bosch process that allowed synthetic fertilizer, new varieties of improvements as a part of the Green Revolution, mechanization, we wouldn't have been able to reduce the type of labor and draft animal inputs that would have been required to feed the 8 billion people that are currently living on the planet. However, all of these innovations have also come with all sorts of downsides and unexpected consequences. They've increased energy use. They've contributed to agriculture emissions, including the fact that today that we now can attribute at least a quarter, if not up to a third of total emissions from the agriculture and food systems that are supplying the food that we eat today. But new innovations like precision fertilizer or the application of old ideas in new ways like circularity can help to ease some of these negative impacts. And novel varieties, practices could help increase agricultural productivity into the future and ease some of the environmental burdens that we're experiencing today, even as we have to recognize that new innovations are going to come with unintended downsides, and we will need to continue a process of continued iteratively getting our food systems changing to resolve these problems into the future. Next slide. And so it's important to think about the interplay of innovation and foresight. Without foresight, innovation is not really possible. We need to have the ability to think into the future, to identify problems that we see today, and to think about what would be the possible benefits of resolving those problems. And in a nutshell, that is what foresight is about. It's about imagining what is possible. What are the possible changes that we can do? What are the consequences of those changes? All innovations are going to have winners and losers, and as such, responsible innovation in the future will need to think about these consequences to weigh the benefits against the costs. Who has to pay the benefits, the costs, who gets to benefit from these innovations, and how do we ameliorate some of these transitions from the food systems of today to the food systems of the future? Foresight is important in terms of being able to give us systematic tools to explore some of these potential consequences. In this chapter, we explored a range of different dimensions in which foresight is already working to inform responsible and mission-oriented innovation into the future, and will be a critical tool to help us think about how can we manage our future innovations landscape, recognizing that while a lot of innovation is driven in the private sector, the public sector continues to provide an important role as well, not only in directly investing in innovations, but also to help fostering an ecosystem that encourages the development of solutions to major societal challenges. In the past, this has contributed to all sorts of different types of calls for solutions, whether it was to develop new tinning and preservation technologies in France, or whether it was the British Navy call to provide a prize for finding a way to calculate longitude to facilitate navigation. In the future, we can expect that we will also need to have a mission orientation to be able to solve the problems of the 21st century and beyond. And as such, foresight is going to play a critical role to informing these policies and to building consensus in which types of futures we may want to manifest. And with that, happy to hand over to Dolapo to talk about West and Central Africa.
Thank you, Daniel. For this section, I would be presenting the work that colleagues and I did on West and Central Africa that we contributed to the regional perspectives section of the work. Next slide, please. So just for context, depending on what institution is doing the designations, the studies on foresight would look at West and Central Africa at some 20 to 23 countries that make up that region. So you see a lot of variability in these countries, from really small countries to large countries like Nigeria with high populations, from relatively low incomes to higher incomes across the region. But the trend that you see across the region is one of increasing urbanization. And you see more and more people are living in or moving to urban areas. Another important trend in this region that is affecting agricultural and food systems is population growth. So you still have many countries in this region that have really high rates of total population. And then while the more people, the changing diets that come with urbanization, factors like that are creating new economic opportunities in agricultural and food systems. But there's a lot of limitations in how countries can take advantage of these opportunities. Income growth tends to be slow across the region. Agricultural productivity has remained quite low. And more recently, you see a lot of impacts of climate change on the region. Of course, these impacts of climate change from country to country within the region, and even within countries, the impacts can be quite different depending on the agroecology. Next slide, please. So one of the key results that we have seen from the foresight work for the Western Central Africa region is just this change in land suitability that is a direct impact of climate change. And with the projections going out to 2050, going out to 2080, you see up to 75% losses in the areas that are suitable for maize. So you see increases in negative impacts of climate change, mostly in the northern part of this Western Central Africa region. And so it's in the cereal belts in the areas where maize is grown, for example. And then for rice, you also see, depending on the foresight scenarios, anything from 20% to half of the areas that currently grow rice no longer being suitable for such production. Now, coupled with this, we see a declining rates of consumption on a per capita basis, and this has implications, of course, for food security. Key outcomes from this kinds of result is that there's increased dependence on imports. So in the case of cereals, for example, you have per capita income, and this would be the figures on the right, the cereals. We have per capita consumption not really changing going into the future, at least according to the projections, the scenarios that have been projected. But when you combine that constant change with the increase in population that is expected for the region, you find that and with low productivity, with reduced areas, we find that the imports for cereals can grow to as much as 50% of the needs in the region. Similar for livestock products. In this case, earlier speakers had spoken about the demand for animal source foods going up. So you see that going up both on a per capita basis, and then because there's this increase in population, you really have this growth in demand for animal source foods. And with not so much happening on the production side, again, you see increased dependence on imports for livestock products. And it's particularly concerning in the region where you see countries that are known currently for being net exporters, at least of live animals, turning into net importers over the 40 or more year projections. And this has implications, obviously, for policies. What the policymakers need to start doing to address these kinds of scenarios that are unfolding. However, it's not all negative in relation to climate change. In the case of roots and tubers, which would primarily be grown in more of the southern regions, southern areas of this region, you see increased suitability or increased production of roots and tubers, and you see the region turning more into a net exporter of these commodities. Next slide, please. What are some of the implications of these results? Obviously, as the demand for animal source foods and other products is increasing, as you have more people moving to urban areas and their diets are changing, then we have this, I think Karl mentioned some of these in his presentation earlier. You have a change in the systems, you have employment opportunities emerging, you have this interaction with migration, and we see a need for policies to address these kinds of issues. And so I would conclude, or we conclude in that chapter by highlighting areas for new focus, and that would include everything from doing direct studies on climate variability to introducing mixed methods approaches to the analysis. So I would stop here and hand over to Chinyi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dolapo. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night to everyone. Today I'm going to present chapter 29 on the future of aquatic foods in the global agri-food systems. Next slide, please. Nourishing 9 billion people by mid-century is a major challenge, and aquatic foods offer high-quality protein and essential micronutrients. In the past 60 years, the global fish consumption has grown faster than the population, indicating higher per capita intake. So the figure on the left shows that the global annual per capita fish consumption has doubled in the last 4 decades, from 11 kilogram per person per year in 1980s to the current 21 kilogram. And our foresight model projected that under an optimistic scenario, per capita fish consumption could reach to 27 kilogram by 2050. And this long-term upward trend is primarily driven by not only the increased production, but also urbanization, rising income, and changing consumer preferences. And the figure on the right shows that the total aquatic food production reached about 230 million tons in 2023, with 190 million tons of fish and 40 million tons of aquatic plants. Aquatic foods are the most traded food commodities in the world. The total fish value was estimated at about $470 billion US. Capture fisheries production has been relatively stable since 1990, fluctuating around 90 million tons per year, whereas aquaculture has grown significantly, and in 2022 marked the history that aquaculture surpassed the capture fisheries for the first time, reaching 91 million tons. The latest foresight studies projected that aquatic food production will continue to increase to meet the rising demand in the short and also medium-long term. This optimistic scenario will require sustained investment on the technological innovation and strong governance and management on the sustainable capture fisheries. Next slide, please. Currently, our global food system are responsible about a quarter of total greenhouse gas emission. A recent studies published in Nature revealed that the wild catch and aquaculture production has lower greenhouse gas emissions than other protein sources. In addition, wild marine catch requires no fresh water or land to harvest. However, these findings do not suggest unlimited production growth and expansion without careful consideration of the environmental trade-offs. Aquatic foods not only generate lower environmental impacts in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, land and water use, but also contribute to the livelihoods of the rural communities. In our recent foresight studies, we developed 2 scenarios in Africa. The first scenario was business as usual, BAU. And the second alternative scenario is called the high, which assume high aquaculture growth being driven by a substantial investment in the industry. The figure on the right shows that under the high scenarios, the total employment for the fish sector grows more than double, reaching 58 million jobs by 2050s. So creating jobs, particularly for the youth in rural areas in Africa, is critical to address the unemployment challenges across the continent. Next slide, please. So in recent years, aquatic foods have become more integrated into foresight models of agriculture and also the land use sector. So several partial equilibrium models, including impact, have integrated fish into the model. So as shown in this slide, the impact fish model was first developed more than 2 decades ago, and now it has evolved and have been updated to provide future scenarios and policy options at the global, regional, and also national level. So despite this progress, the role of aquatic foods in the food system transformation sometimes still remain relatively overlooked due to the limited data and evidence. So given the aquatic food system are highly heterogeneous and complex, so we need a more disaggregated foresight modeling studies to capture the diversity of the trends within the specific subsectors. And these analyses are very important for developing the sustainable intervention in the fish sector, and more important for guiding the transformation of food system towards healthier diets. Thank you very much. Over to you, Elisabetta.
Thank you, Chinyin. Thank you very much, Keith, Karl, Daniel, Dolapo, and you, Chinyi. Your presentation gave our audience a flavor on what is in the book. But of course, there is much, much more. So please feel free to download your free copy today. You have all the links of selected chapters of the whole book in our IFPRI website or on the CGIAR repository, CGIAR space. Soon we will also share with you an Amazon link in case you want to get a paper copy. This will be available later on. So again, thank you all. I would like now to move on to our panel discussion. We have a very rich panelists today, and it's my great pleasure to welcome them all. We have Vanessa de Fonseca Pereira. She's advisor at the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock and analyst at Embrapa, Brazil. We have Kindie Tesfaye Fantaye, head of climate adaptation and resilience at the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, and Ruben Echeverria, senior advisor agricultural development at the Gates Foundation. Please all put on your camera, and I have some questions I would like to pose to you, and I'm very eager to start this discussion. Kindie, my first question is for you. You have worked in different institutions at multiple scales. How do you see the future of food system in terms of link across global, regional, and national or local levels?
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm glad to be part of this book launch here. As you said, I think as speakers who came before me mentioned it, the future food systems will be increasingly shaped by multi-level interconnections from the global to the local level, driven by several drivers. The main ones would be climate change, technological innovations, shifting consumer preferences, and evolving governance structures, which are shaping from actually the global to the local level. And this will be, in fact, these factors will shape our future food system. And this will be really an issue even in developing countries as well. So at global level, we'll see the trade and supply chains that are affecting food systems, and this will be governed by how governments and multilateral and bilateral relations happen at global level. And also the agreements on sustainability issues, looking at, for example, the issue of climate change. This will govern again the future food systems. Another important factor at global level would be the technology transfer, innovations that are emerging, particularly in developing countries, and their adaptation in developing countries will also shape our future food system. When it comes to regional level, there are also trade and policy issues that are happening at regional level. If you come to sub-Saharan Africa, for example, the African free trade agreement that is shaping up well in Africa will determine the role of food systems across regions and countries within. And this is the same is true for other regions as well as in the global south and also north. Those are also important ones. And the other important factor that will determine our food system in the future will be the shared resources and risks, particularly looking at transboundary water systems. Pests and diseases will necessitate regional cooperation in surveillance, early warning systems, and perhaps adaptive management of those issues. Those will also determine our food systems in the future and the coming soon, in fact. The other one will be national policies and also sectoral and intra-sectoral coordination within countries. There are also these issues happening within countries, but also their seamless coordination as well as how they operate within countries will also determine, and that will also shape our food systems. Another important factor at the national level would be the public-private partnership, which is growing in many ways, but also has an important role in shaping our food systems. This can't be left either way. So both the private sector as well as the public sector should work together. But the most important one would be the local level, where most of the food production comes from. And speakers who came earlier mentioned it, most of the population is living in developing and mostly poor countries, and how production is shaped at those levels will determine it. For example, the role of extension services and how the smallholder farmers across the global south will be supported by governments, by different actors within the system, will determine how food is produced, transported, and made available to consumers as well. And the other one would be the rural urban linkage that's happening across countries, particularly in Africa, for example. If you take the urban population is growing fast, and how this is related to the smallholder farmers in terms of supply of food will determine again our food systems in the future. So this will be also followed by community engagements at local actors, especially women, youth, and marginalized groups will also be an important part of the equation in shaping our food systems at different levels. Over to you, back to you, Elisabetta.
Thank you, Kindie. Thank you for this. Let's continue now with Vanessa. Vanessa, you have experience both in research agency, in Embrapa, and government ministry, government organization. You are working for the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Food Supply of Brazil. So how can analysis of the future of food system inform decision making when policy goals are many and resources are limited, and we know this very well.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, future-oriented studies are strategic tools, especially in contexts of scarce resources and multiple public policy objectives. As Sandra and Keith mentioned, they are not intended to predict the future, but rather to organize or anticipate uncertainties, supporting more evidence-based decision-making. In the case of the outlook for Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, which is in the chapter that we are launching today. For example, we were able to anticipate trends such as the growth in corn use for biofuel in Brazil, which expected to increase by almost 70% over the next decade. So this data helps policymakers to prioritize investments in logistics, storage, or traceability, for instance, in line with each country's objectives. Additionally, these studies make it possible to visualize policy alternatives, as already mentioned today. So I bring another example. In the Argentinian dairy sector, for instance, while fluid milk consumption is declining, powdered milk production is on the rise. So this dynamic helps us think about policies that reconcile nutrition, value addition, and foreign trade. But perhaps the greatest value of these studies lies in their ability to structure long-term dialogue among different institutions and countries. They provide a shared analytical foundation for discussing future pathways in a technical, transparent, and collaborative manner. So we can have coordinated policy efforts based on this shared understanding could bolster food security and foster more sustainable food systems. Over to you, Elisabetta.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for this. Ruben, the Gates Foundation has been a long-time supporter of data and analysis related to the future of food system, and this is much appreciated from all of us. But how can this type of analysis inform decision-making by funders and the partners they work with?
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Greetings from Washington, D.C. And as usual, every time I participate in an IFPRI or CGIAR event, I learn a lot, much more than I can contribute. But this is a great initiative. And the title of the book, How Much We Know About the Future of Food Systems, my quick answer is not enough. Meaning that there has been a lot of progress over the decades of foresight analysis, good work, good recommendations. I give you just a few examples that we are looking at the Gates Foundation at the moment on the production side of the food system to try to eradicate so many myths about rural development and agricultural development. For instance, we know that the small-scale producers have huge diversified income sources, not just selling crops. We know that these small-scale producers are purchasing inputs and they are fully engaged in the output markets, contrary to conventional wisdom of high self-consumption. We know that these producers are super clustered into MSMEs, and many of these households own medium, small-size rural enterprises. And then we know that even the smallest of these producers hire agricultural labor. Just to mention a few things that we are looking at that production side of the food system. Now, just to be a bit more provocative, and thank you again for the invite, Elisabetta. Despite all of this knowledge, it's key for policymakers and funders to have a good vision of what's coming ahead. So we all agree. All of us here, if you read the book, we all agree. Foresight is super important. Ex-ante analysis is critical. It should continue. But I'm looking at the science policy interface. Are we using it? What's the impact? And I am always, very, very positive. I think it has had a big impact. But how is this going to be made available in simple formats for funders and policymakers that are very distracted for many things and they change their agendas quickly? How can they digest? How can they absorb thousands or hundreds of recommendations and suggestions coming from foresight? So I want to push a bit on that part of the delivery of all of these great results. Because funders can become your best advocates. Funders could be your best friends in advocating for more foresight work, since, for example, CGIAR funders not only fund the CGIAR, but they fund many other organizations like AGRA, sitting here, and others who complement the CGIAR very well, including governments and others. So for that, having a country focus is very important. Of course, all countries are part of our region, but the more we focus on a country, I think the science policy interface and the impact will penetrate much further. So just to end, one line as usual, I have many friends in the CG. I don't want to lose my friends, but I want to provoke a bit perhaps with a question for Sandra or for others in the audience. Now, back to you, CGIAR. If this is so important, if foresight analysis and all of this ex ante is so important, ideally, all the elements of the CGIAR research portfolio should have a very clear foresight to show a way forward, and not just perhaps one area of work or one program. So that's something for future discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben, for your answer and sharing your thinking. I have some more questions because it's very interesting, and I'm feeling very fortunate we have you all here. Vanessa, I would like to hear from you. Brazil is one of the world's leading exporter of agricultural commodities. So how do you see the future of food trade in a world of increasing uncertainties?
Oh, thank you again, Elisabetta. That's a very timely question. Brazil plays a central role in global food trade, as we know, especially as a major exporter of commodities like soybeans, corn, beef, and poultry. But looking ahead, the landscape for food trade is becoming more uncertain and volatile, with direct implications for Brazil. One major source of uncertainty, as mentioned many times today, is climate change, which threatens productivity and shifts global comparative advantages. Agriculture is both a contributor to climate change and a victim of its impacts, such as changing rainfall patterns, temperature extremes, and more frequent extreme events. Yet, studies show that agriculture can also be part of the solution through sustainable practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build resilience. At the same time, geopolitical fragmentation is intensifying, disrupting traditional trade flows. Also, with slower global food demand growth, markets won't shrink, but competition and standards will tighten. So for Brazil, I guess this means two things. First, we need to diversify markets and strengthen our sustainability credentials. And second, we have the opportunity to position ourselves as a reliable supplier in a world where stability and trust matter as much as price and volume. So in this environment, competitiveness will depend more on resilience, traceability, and environmental performance. Brazil has the natural resources and technical expertise to lead, but of course, staying ahead will require continued investment in credibility, sustainability, and risk management. And from my perspective, I believe we are fully committed to that mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Kindie, I would like to continue with you and hear what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for future food system in Africa within a dynamic global context?
Thank you very much. Thank you again, Elisabetta. Yes, there are key challenges and as well as opportunities for transforming African food systems. Maybe starting from the challenge would be give us to see the opportunities as well. So if you look at the big challenges in Africa for our food system are a bit of five. I think already mentioned in the book, climate change and variability, which is becoming worse because of the high vulnerability of the food system in Africa is a big challenge. So climate vulnerability in general is a big one because of the ones we know, the climate extremes, and also the limited access to resilient technologies infrastructure generally make it's a bit challenging. The second probably challenge is the fragmentation of the food system itself. In Africa, there are fragmentations among sectors, among institutions at national level, and also policies are not current yet. So these ones will definitely be a challenge until we come to a point where governments reorganize those ones, even if there are big startups in some countries. The third challenge is resource pressures, the pressure on resources, particularly land, water, and also natural resources, given the fast increase in population. So this will compromise, the expected transformation in food systems. The other one is probably related to this is the unreliable practices, or what we call the mismanagement of resources is also another one. The fourth challenge is the demographic dividend, which is the youth unemployment. In some countries in Africa, the youth population is close to 70%, but in most countries it's about 50%. So that resource is not yet utilized in the food system because the food system is not ready to attract the youth population into it. So that becomes still a challenge, but also which could be an opportunity if well exploited. The fifth challenge for the African food system is the global market volatility, and also the volatility of the political landscape across the globe. We remember the issues of what happened outside of Africa, affecting Africa in very much in terms of food imports and exports as well. So these are the challenges. The main challenges, I would say, but there are many other challenges. But I think when it comes to the opportunities, Africa has also very big opportunities. One is related to the adaptation to the climate vulnerabilities we mentioned. There is a very indigenous knowledge that has, developed over centuries, which can be exploited and capitalized in adapting the system to the challenges of climate change, together with the new scientific innovations and digitalization that comes with. So if Africa leverages its own indigenous knowledge with a new environment, that could be a big opportunity to exploit and adapt to the challenges somehow. Second opportunity is the one we mentioned earlier, I said, is the digital agriculture, which brings in, attracts the youth to get involved into the food system through, mobile platforms, AI, remote sensing, and also the extension services, including market access and climate forecasting. That will bring in, more positive changes to the system. The other one is the youth-led innovation hubs that are emerging in Africa. There are a lot of investments happening on the youth right now, and this will be leveraged to transform the African food system. The third important area as an opportunity is the regional integration that is happening through the Africa Continental Free Trade, which can unlock, intra-African trade and also harmonization of food standards and policies. This will be a big opportunity, and that is gaining ground right now in Africa, and that will bring in, shared investment in infrastructure and research, which can also help, transform the food system in Africa. The fourth one is a increasing level of green finance and climate funds to Africa, somehow slowly. This is expanding, and this is helping, bringing in the climate finance to Africa, as well as the emerging blended finance models that are gaining traction to de-risk investments of smallholder farming in Africa. Probably the last but not the least is the nutrition and food security awareness that is growing across countries and also by governments. Some countries, such as, for example, Rwanda, has developed a food system, 5-year food system strategy known as PSDA 5, which is showing that some governments are tending to shift from mere agriculture to food systems. That is also shaping how countries can leverage, and this is expanding in other countries as well. Urban agriculture and circular food systems are also starting up in Africa, and perhaps this will be also an opportunity. But I think this will be, in general, will be supported by multi-level governance, youth and gender inclusion, public-private partnerships, and data and evidences that we've talked a little bit earlier. So I think this will help us, to shape the African food system in the coming years. Thank you very much, Elisabetta.
Thank you to you, Kindie, for this insight. I have another question for Ruben. Related to artificial intelligence, and how do you think AI will change the way we understand the past and plan for the future? So can artificial intelligence play a role in establishing this learning loop between ex post and foresight?
Okay, that's a great question, and the quick answer is completely. We at the Gates Foundation, we love both artificial and natural intelligence, and I think this is a great chapter for the CGIAR, which is already heavily involved in using AI tools for the research. So it's a great question because of the integration of AI and foresight in food systems. We believe that it holds immense potential for addressing all of these challenges that are in this great book that you just finished. So I give you some examples, and I also thank my colleague. We are funding that. We are funding CGIAR on these topics. So this is very relevant for us and other partners. Alan Renison, one of my colleagues that you know well at IFPRI, sent me a few comments recently, very timely about this. So I just will read the titles. There is no time for more, but just to give you a good answer, hopefully, to your question. For example, artificial intelligence driven foresight for food production, just the topics that we are looking at the foundation. For example, precision agriculture for optimized resource use and sustainability. Huge new frontier to use AI on precision ag. Accelerated crop breeding and genomic selection. This has been going on already, of course, for a long time in the private sector and in the CGIAR recently. So that's another huge one. How about automated tasks and robotics? There's a lot also going on. If we go to other areas like food loss, waste reduction, very important for food systems. Again, you can improve the inventories and supply chain. You can use smart packaging. There are AI-powered solutions in many sectors, including for household adaptation and so on. And then you have the ethical considerations and challenges that we are also looking carefully, like data privacy, ownership, algorithmic bias, equities, job displacement, environmental impacts, and so on. So in conclusion, Elisabetta, we think that, and we would like to support this area as much as we can, that AI offers a lot of powerful tools. Like all tools, it depends who uses those tools and what is the main objective of that use. To enhance food systems, particularly on foresight, to address all of these huge challenges that you have in the book. Now, again, let me close as I did in the first round with a question for the CGIAR, just to provoke a bit, in a positive sense, because I really congratulate you and Keith and others for IFPRI and CG for the book. So imagine having the AI capacity as we have it today, and we can go over, we meaning in general, we can go over thousands of IFPRI policy recommendations after 50 years of great research from IFPRI. All of these recommendations have been given to governments, to colleagues in the CG, and to other agencies. Imagine if you can use that to go back and do some AI archaeology and make sense of all of that. There are thousands of them. And again, on my earlier point, there is not too much capacity in the global south to absorb and digest a tsunami of policy recommendations coming to these poor governments, try to understand and do all of this analysis and move forward with good effort. So imagine also having the analytical capacity of AI to go over hundreds of IFPRI ex-ante scenarios. I look at those and they're great, but there are hundreds of them. One recent example that comes to mind, your IFPRI LAC group recently engaged in a great conversation with the government of Mexico. What will be the scenarios and the foresight given potential trade issues with the US, for instance? So that's another one. So I finish with my point that there is limited absorption capacity, and perhaps the future books or future efforts should be pointing not only at improving the analytical models using AI, but also looking at the capacity development in the Global South on how to use all of these results. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, everyone. It is now time for our Q&A with our online audience. Let me ask all our speakers, please, to turn their camera on. We have many questions, and I'm now filtering here live and direct. I have one which I think is for you, Sandra. Thank you for being still here with us. In your role, you must face often in your role as a chief scientist of the CGIAR. So that's why I think this question is it for you. What is the role of data and research in a world of the tightly constrained resources and competing priorities?
Well, data, okay, yeah. Sorry.
No, and giving the floor to you, maybe if you want also to respond to some of the reflections that Ruben shared with us before. So I give you extra time as a moderator.
Well, thank you so much, Elisabetta. And thanks for the question. I really appreciate it. Well, absolutely, data it's an important asset. And I think this is one that CGIAR really have an advantage in many ways. The reason for is CGIAR is in some of the places that we are, developing experiments with partners as well, not just us, but partners as well on the ground. And that data really is critical for us to develop the models, to get the foresight, to do all those things in the future. So absolutely, data is critical, has always been, but more than ever, I think we need to do that. And I think the one challenge that we have is how we turn data into insights and how we organize the data in the way that we can actually build upon more of these models, more of this integration across science programs, for instance, more insights from the science that is happening and complementing from different centers. So those are the challenges that we have, and we are working on addressing this challenge. But for me, the future of AI starts with data, good data that we can manage in a way in pipelines, and the way that we really do in a different way that we've done in the past. But we are addressing that. Now, I want to take an opportunity to also talk about one of the questions, the provocation from Ruben, our friend from CGIAR. He always does that. So the question is how we use this beyond the program, which is dedicated to policy innovations, is one of the science programs of the CG. How we actually take this type of analysis and go and foresight, how we are using this to make decisions across all programs. And it starts really at very, very beginning, Ruben, with the prioritization process, where now we're looking indicators, but we're not looking indicators of the present, we're looking projections of the indicators of the future. In other words, if we are looking climate mitigation, climate adaptation, so by country level, by region level, what do we expect this to be in 2040, 2030, 2040? And then when we look at that, then we can start looking, this is where we are today. This is where we, the problem is going to be, whether it's going to be bigger or smaller. And then that gives us sort of the delta opportunity. In other words, this is where we are today, and this is where we have the biggest opportunity to make a difference, because that's where the biggest problem is going to be. And I think we had several of the examples today of insights from different regions, from different perspectives, whether it's diet, whether it's food production, whether it's climate and how that's going to affect our food systems, all those things. At the end of the day, as we do the science of today, we are not doing for today, we're doing for 10 years in a row. So how we actually look at those opportunities and project them to the future, where the problems are going to be and where they're going to get amplified by the problems of climate and that we are facing today and will continue to be facing. So how we use that information for decision today. And that for me is where all the programs are looking this, are in a prioritization process that starts with key strategic indicators that are linked to the 5 impact areas that the strategy of CGIAR 25-2030 portfolio is solving for. So I just want to address that question because I think it's a pertinent question. It's one that is, we are already applying it to make decisions about the future and what the present for the future. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Sandra, for this. Let's continue because I see the chat very lively with a lot of questions. Daniel, I have a question for you. Because you spoke earlier about the importance of innovation, and Rupert also shared his thoughts on artificial intelligence. Can you say more about how you see the role of artificial intelligence in thinking about the future of food system?
Sure. I mean, I think it's, as Ruben highlighted, it's a potential tool that gives us a lot of power in terms of being able to more rapidly explore data that exists, perhaps connecting pieces together in ways that we might not have done previously. I mean, I think some of the bits we've learned in terms of, like, say, from chess masters that play with AI is that you learn new techniques and new strategies that you might not have explored without the tools, and that in combination that you can do things that using just one or the other approach might not have facilitated. And so I think AI definitely provides a capability for expanded analysis and looking for trends and understanding different possible causal mechanisms. However, we have to recognize that AI is built and trained on data sets that exist today. And so that means that there's all sorts of embedded biases within these types of tools. So we have to be really careful in their application to make sure that we don't perpetuate these types of inequalities into the future. And then we also have to realize that foresight is about judgment. So we can't surrender responsibility to AI and other things. We still have to make judgments. We have to decide on values and what we care about. And so ultimately, we still have to choose what are the futures that we care about? What are the futures that are desirable? Which ones do we want to manifest? And AI can help us then think about how do we actualize those futures. But there will, I think, in my opinion, will always be a critical role for the human component in these, because ultimately the AI can't tell us what futures we should want.
Thank you, Daniel. I have here a question from the audience from Rhodes Ndlovu, that is a Program Cash-Based Intervention Officer at the UNHCR. Maybe this question, Keith, is for you or Daniel. The question is, despite its promise, technology could worsen inequalities if not applied inclusively. Would you want to speak into digital divide, data colonialism, dependency risk?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I can just start at a general level, not specifically about digital divide, but about technology more generally, because the similar question applies at that general level. Technologies, they're not a choice. Innovation happens, but it's not universally accessible or universally applicable. And this is a distinction Daniel noted earlier in his presentation about both private and public incentives and support for innovation. Certainly, private incentives for innovation are very strong. That includes farmers innovating. It includes private corporations innovating at a bigger scale. But that doesn't necessarily address all of the needs we have for innovation. Some smallholders may be aware of innovations, but don't have the resources to adopt them, or they may not even be aware of some of those innovations. So this is where the role of a public sector comes in, both because it addresses different challenges that may not be met by private sector, and because it can help make innovations that come from the private sector more accessible. But certainly it's a really important consideration that needs to be part of the strategy of making sure that opportunities are widely accessible. Daniel, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or anyone else. Please jump in.
Yeah, no, I think to add on to that, I think we also need to just remember that innovation is embedded within social processes. And so we need to think about this in an intentional way. And so there are definitely power asymmetries and power dynamics that need to be considered in terms of how different innovations are adopted, which innovations get incentivized. And we should be thinking about how do we create the social institutions and infrastructure to make our societies more resilient. So not just because innovation itself can be a shock, but we know climate change and environmental pressures are shocks as well. So we should be trying to make our societies more robust to these changes. We need to have the sort of social and safety nets that can help facilitate, because we know that new technologies will absolutely have winners and losers. And so if we're going to have these, we need to figure out ways that we can ease the cost and make sure that that burden is shared a little bit more equally, and that the benefits are also shared more equally. So I think it's important to also incorporate then efforts to try to build up those social institutions that can facilitate those transitions.
Thank you, Daniel. We have so if you guys are promising me a very quick answer, I have a very interesting question, but we are really running out of time. The question comes from Kamel Elharth, advisor on sustainable finance at the Samba Center of Food and Climate in Kigali, Rwanda. By 2030, 86% of the world's poorest people are projected to live in fragile contexts. What are some effective strategies to address fragility and conflict in order to build resilient food system and mobilize private investment? Maybe this is opening a new book, this question. But if any of you wants 1 minute to try to address this.
I'm gonna give a try.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sandra.
Okay, this is a excellent question. Excellent question. But I will try to answer this in sort of components of that we need to be thinking about. Okay, on how we actually address this and how we get in fragility. When you talk about fragility, how we actually incentivize, financing as well, and find ways to get there. I think one aspect I think is we need to start with evidence, right? We need to understand where those problems are, understand the root causes of the problem, the bottlenecks of the system, because sometimes, it's about a bottleneck that can really, just make it happen once you address that. So we need to fully understand that. So science is important to that. Evidence is important. Evidence-driven decisions are important to that. The second thing, I think we also have then to find if these bottlenecks are technology-based, then or whatever they are, like a social, we need to find which solutions, what we have available, and how we translate these solutions into in technologies into these different environments. Because sometimes you do have a technology available, but the translation of that, the application of that to that particular problem, to that particular social context, takes really effort. You need to think about how you're going to translate and apply that. So that's the second part. And the third part, I think, is the incentives. So the three parts for me, then, closing is incentives, is that sometimes you do, have solved the bottlenecks, you do have found ways to translate that technology, but the things just don't move because you don't have the right incentives in place. And that's where the policies come. That's where the governments needs to mobilize themselves with incentives to be able to make it happen. So for me, when it comes to resilience, we need to understand those three things and apply them for action. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, and also for being on time. We have only 5 minutes. I'm very sorry that we had to rush. So this has been a very interesting discussion. I would like to give the floor to Clemens Brasinger. He's our ad interim director of the Policy and Innovation Program of the CGIAR, that is hosting the work on foresight and prioritization of the CGIAR. Clemens, over to you for some reflections and concluding remarks.
Yeah, hello everyone. Congratulations and a huge thanks to the team for this impressive and collective effort. I'm confident that you have all convinced us about the importance of foresight today. A very informative webinar. Let's all make sure we deep dive a bit more into the book. Yeah, let me conclude with a few thoughts. First, I agree that this foresight analysis is essential, not only for policymakers, but for all actors across the food system, including private sectors and others, to understand and better plan what all food system actors, including us, policymakers, researchers, etc., decide today will indeed determine how a food system will develop in the future. The CGIAR Policy Innovations Program definitely stands ready to work with all of you to refine and develop more such projections going forward. Now, secondly, and that is related to Ruben's point, rigorous and innovative analysis is important, but it needs to be used. It needs to be taken up to create impact. And that's the science policy interface that we keep wrestling with. So it needs policy engagement, and we started such engagement today, and we will continue to do that at regional and country levels. And I encourage all of you that are listening to us today to also socialize the book and its findings through your social media networks and other channels with your colleagues. I think a third important point that we have seen today with this book, that no single institution can address the complexity of the food system today. It needs a lot of partners, it needs a close collaboration, it needs sharing capacity and ownership, strengthening capacity across the system. So let's keep in mind the ultimate objective is always to inform better decision making and to share capacity. Now, a quick point to AI. I agree, it can be very good for sense making out of data. An additional point that we are working on, it can also help our partners to facilitate the use of the rather complex tools, right? So we can enable with AI our partners that might not be as tech savvy to create their own scenarios and to make their own assumptions, and so to help in a more targeted way their decision making. Now, last but not least, let me give you an outlook of other outputs that are coming out of the foresight area of work 1 of the Policy Innovations Program very soon. There will be a global outlook report on food production, demand, markets, and other food system indicators later this year. There'll be an outlook report on animal source foods and their impacts on diets, health, livelihoods, and the environment in 2026. And also in 2026, we expect a report on impact of R&D investments and opportunity. Now, I'm looking forward to these next outputs of the foresight and prioritization team, and most importantly, the outcomes and the impact that these outputs will generate. So again, congratulations and thanks everyone. Back to you, Elisabetta.
Thank you, Clemens, for this, and reminding also our outputs for 2025, 6 and beyond. Let me thank you all, guys, for being here, our online participants, but mostly our IFPRI communication and public affairs events team that made this possible, connecting us from all over the world and sharing our insight. Thank you, everyone, and let's connect soon for a new event. Bye, everyone.